rescue, revamp, create. The art of drum synthesis. The new course is available at Letsynthesize Academy.
Yo, that Larsen here, welcome to the Neurofunk Sunday episode. If you're into mid-range heavy distorted bass lines, you are in for a treat today. I'm designing 4 powerful Reese basses in kilohertz faceplan inspired by the signature sound of Forward. If you've ever wanted to nail that aggressive yet clean drum and bass, stick around. And like always, you can grab this project from my Patreon below with tons of other drum and bass and dubstep stuff. And click here for my academy if you want to learn a lot more about music progression. I recommend you the drum synthesis masterclass, but right now let's jump into it. Let's start with the most forward bass. I started with the 1+3 saw sweep wavetable, that is a factory wavetable. That is so cool because when you go higher, obviously you need to open up a lot of things to make it really strong on the mid-lows. If you don't do that, you will get a really similar sound on 1 octave higher. That is not what you want basically. You just want to have a really mid-focused higher octave Reese. Also for the wobble, I used LFO 1 and I controlled the rate with this LFO. Now first I used the note modifier, but that would be a fail because when I went higher, the rate of the LFO changed too. But I didn't want to do that. I want to have the same wobble. It doesn't matter if you are on F1 or A1. But basically you could do that with the note modifier. The main point was here just to stay the wobble on the same frequency, doesn't matter which note you play on. So the 1+3 saw sweep wavetable is really cool for this purpose, but we need to add a lot more adjustments to it. First of all, a mid boost and a little cut on the highs with some distortion. So it sounds really stupid on the higher octave, so let's add an FM. This time just a sine wave, so as you can see I'm modulating the FM here. We're getting closer to that mid-rangey kind of stuff on the higher octave, but it's still not enough. Let's add the sub that is basically just a filtered saw wave and the compressed noise high-pass filter. Yeah, it's a lot better, but still not crisp. So because I routed the main saw into lane 1, but the sub to the master and the note to lane 2, I can add a whole bunch of distortion and the high-pass filter and the disperser only to the main saw. Now it is a lot better on the higher octave, but it is very muddy. So it's time to compress and crunch the main saw and the sub and the noise together and also clean these up. And this is where the effects of lane 3 comes handy, and basically the main point here is to add more distortion and clean up at the end with this slice EQ. And as you can see, I'm changing the characteristic of the EQ just a bit when we go higher. Because without the EQ, it's not very pleasing, so we definitely need to cut a lot more on the mids and the mid-lows. But I wanted a little more presence at around 350 Hz when we go higher. And also I added back the 200 Hz range when we go higher again. So this is where you can see the controlled EQ peaks. So this is actually very important. When you go higher on the octaves with these Reeses, you need to open up a lot of things. So you need to add some boost on the mids, maybe on the mid-lows, and also play with the EQ, and probably you will have to play with wavetable position, distortions, and if you want you can add comb filters or whatever. So the main point here is to have a really strong mid-range on the higher octave, but also you will have to clean this up to have a clean sound. And for the wobble I modulated the wavetable position and the gain of the sub and of the main saw too. And when I went higher, as you can see, I added a little more boost on the mid-range here and also some little more FM by modulating the level of the FM modulator, and these are for the EQ. Okay, so the next one is again very forwardy stuff. It contains 3 layers: the main bass, saw, sub and noise. So the sub is again the same like previously, but the main point obviously here is the bass and the saw. Now the saw is very simple. I just took this saw wave with a unison and I cranked up the harmonic to 6, so it plays a really nice fifth over the bass. And I high passed and low passed it a bit to fit really well in the mix. But with the main bass I had to be a little trickier because I wanted to have a really growly, a little more aggressive kind of sound. And luckily in Faceplant we have these nice growl wavetables. So I chose the gross one, cranked up the unison and modulated it with the first harmonic sine wave again. Without that, it's just a really screechy kind of thing. But by modulating it with the sine, it turns really growly. Then I use a bandpass filter with some distortion and a little boost at around 1000 Hz to have a really strong mid-range. So from this point the sound will focus on the mid-range, because without these it sounds like a saw basically. But with the bandpass it starts growling, especially with some distortion and some boost at around 1K. Let's add back the saw. From this point we just have the regular stuff: distortion, compression, a little cleanup, and a cut on the lows because we're using a separate sub. So as you heard, there's a lot going on at around like 500 Hz. I definitely had to treat it. And a little boost on the lows and a little cut on the highs. So this is a pretty simple stuff, but works all the time when you go for a forward sound. Okay, here comes my favorite, this guy. Very aggressive, very angry, but it's a little chaotic. It's not very controlled, but I wanted to give a little rhythm for this type of bass. So this is why I resampled it and chopped it up using the favorite spots and came up with this. But there is a trick inside of this Reese. So again, we're using the same sub and the same noise. So without them, but it gets a lot better when we compress and distort with the sub and the noise. Okay, so the workaround is the same again. We're using one source sound that we FM it with something, then we start filtering and distorting it. So the starting point is the saw that I had to modulate it with this triple FM wavetable. And as you can see, both are on the second harmonic, which means they are 1 octave higher than the sub. And that can be a good option if you want to have a little more on the mid-range. So the mid bass is a little higher than the sub, than the fundamental. Okay, so after that, a notch, a distortion, a little boost on the interest range of the sound, and the low pass filter movement. Because without them, because with distortion, this will sound great, but if you overdo the highs, it will just go into complete noise. Okay, so after that I had to shape this sound using a Foreman filter. And I'm modulating it with LE41. Then the first stage of distortion comes. And this shaper sounds really nice on the mid bass. And don't forget that right now we are dealing only with the mid bass because the sub and the noise goes to lane 3. Okay, so some comb filter can come handy, adding a lot more sweep to the sound. Then a saturator. And the purpose of this LFO that controls the distortion amount and the noise level is to have a little brighter sound on the top of the modulation, so here. And because this LFO is limited on the high range, I wanted to create a new LFO. Okay, so let's cut the lows. Because when I add an OTT, I just want to have a more mid-range sound. If I don't do that, it goes too much into a subby kind of direction. I added the reverb too to have a little texture baked into the sound. Especially when I add another compression. We are getting to the sound that we are searching for. Another sweep layer on top of the bass. Controlled by this LFO. And here comes the trick. It has a nice character, but it is not deep, not evil enough. So that's why I added a frequency shifter. Sounds so cool and aggressive and growly. I really love this one. But I had to again kill the lows and a little more on the highs. The purpose of this high pass filter is add a little more on the mid-range to have a little growlier sound. So if you ever made a growl bass, you know that high passing with really high resonance can create an awesome growly texture to it. Okay, so it's time to distort and EQ them together with the bass and the noise. I added a limiter to limit the input before it goes into the distortion. So again, the mids and the mid-lows are a little too much, so that's why this EQ add is here. So yeah, you may ask, why did I added a lot of mid boosts when after that I had to EQ them? Yeah, basically the final EQ is just a color correction. You can do whatever you want, but if you don't implement the mid-range, the moving and evolving mid-range into the bass, it won't be possible to use an EQ, especially at the end of the chain. And some distortion. So I really love this sound, but again I had to bounce it and play with it like Lego. Awesome movement. Okay, and finally we have this ending bass. Again, it's super simple. I bet you can hear that this is basically just a saw with a higher octave or a higher frequency sine wave compressed and distorted together. And you were right, this is it. Again, the same sub and the noise. Stupid simple, I just had to automate the level of the saw. Then I added this wavetable as a frequency modulator. And this LD4 modulates the level of oscillator 1. Then I had to cut the lows again to focus a lot more on the mid-range. Then here comes the higher frequency sine that creates a screechy quality. Right now it sounds a little stupid, but after distortion it will sound great. Okay, let's add some slight distortion to it now. It's just a slight touch to it. We don't want to go crazy because the point is here to crunch everything together after the whole stuff. So with the sub and the noise. So let's add back the sub and the noise. So this time the saw goes into lane 2. So let's activate it. Let's start with distortion. So this is where the fun begins. Then a compression because with OTT we are leveling up all the frequencies from the start point of the modulation to the end point of the modulation. I wanted to add a little reverb to it, but just as a tiny touch to it. And only on the beginning part of the modulation. So as you can hear, this is where I wanted to add the reverb. Okay, then a little cut on the highs, and I'm playing with the pitch shifter with this envelope. So it starts a little lower, and because of the pitch shifter, it changes the format of the sound. So it gives a lot different sound if you do this, for example, using just on the main pitch or on the oscillator pitch. Okay, so final cleanup with the slice EQ and the final distortion. And as you can see, I changed the sound a bit on the beginning of the bass. Because the 300 Hz area was just too heavy in the beginning, so the lower part of pitch bent the range. It's just very boomy. I had to treat it. So this LE4 creates the fade-in effect, and this LE4 controls the reverb and the sub-level. So with this we're keeping some room for a very twisted kind of reverby pitch bendy effect on the beginning of the bass. Because without that, so without pulling back the sub a little bit, you will just create a mess on the pitch bend range of the sound, the pitch droppy part of the sound. And a few words about the effects. Some mystical sound. The first is the string that is actually coming from operator because it's just the saw with another saw, filtered chorus, very heavily filtered, and a really heavy reverb that creates an illusion if it was recorded inside a huge hall. On every forward bar I added a little effect. That you probably can't really hear, but inside the mix it creates a very fat sound to the main Reeses. So this is with. This is the without. I really miss that huge width that this little effect gives to the sound. And some risers. And with the drums, I think they sound great. Right, so grab this project from my Patreon below and click here for my academy if you want to learn more about music production. See you guys next time. Peace!